The evening roll call began at precisely 1800 hours on a February night when the Polish winter cut through greatcoats like accusations waiting to be answered. February 14th, 1945. Somewhere between the certainty that the war was ending and a future nobody could predict, the prisoners of Stalag Luft III stood in formation while German guards counted heads with the mechanical precision that defined life behind barbed wire. When they reached Hut 7, Block C, the count stopped. Lieutenant David Davey Thompson, RAF, serial number 139847, was missing. The guards recounted, once, twice, 3 times. Each time the same result. 1 prisoner short. The commandant was summoned. Dogs were released. Searchlights swept the compound like God's judgment looking for the guilty. And for 6 hours, the entire camp was locked down while German officers tore apart barracks looking for the escaped British pilot. But they found nothing. No tunnel. No hole in the fence. No body. Just an empty bunk and a photograph of a woman tucked under the pillow, as if Davey had simply evaporated into winter air. Then, at 0200 hours, when the search had expanded beyond the camp perimeter, when the dogs were circling through the forest and the Gestapo had been called to investigate potential resistance connections, something impossible happened. Davey Thompson walked back through the main gate, wearing a Wehrmacht guard's greatcoat, covered in blood that wasn't his, and carrying something wrapped in a blanket that would save 17 lives and change everything the Germans thought they knew about this British pilot. Before we go deeper into this extraordinary true story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from around the world. These stories of impossible courage need to be remembered, and you're part of keeping them alive. Lieutenant David Thompson, 31 years old, a vicar's son from a village in Yorkshire where helping neighbours was doctrine before religion, had been a prisoner at Stalag Luft III for 14 months. Shot down over Hamburg in December 1943. Captured after 3 days hiding in a barn, where a German farmer had found him, fed him, and turned him in with an apology that sounded genuine. Davey had made 1 escape attempt in his first month, got 12 miles before a Hitlerjugend patrol caught him near the Czech border. Spent 2 weeks in the cooler, solitary confinement on reduced rations, learning that escape was possible, but success was unlikely. He'd settled into prison life after that. Became the camp's unofficial medic, using the medical training he'd received as an RAF flight surgeon to treat everything the limited camp hospital couldn't handle. Broken bones set with scavenged wood. Infections treated with improvised antibiotics made from bread mould. Dental work performed with tools fashioned from bed springs. The Germans tolerated his medical work because it reduced their responsibility for prisoner health. The other POWs called him Doc and trusted him with their lives in ways they didn't trust the German camp doctor who rationed morphine like it was gold and cared more about paperwork than patients. But on February the 14th, 1945, Davey had disappeared. And now, 8 hours later, he was back, wearing a dead guard's coat. The commandant, Oberst Heinrich Wagner, met Davey at the gate with 6 armed guards, rifles raised, fingers on triggers. Wagner was older, maybe 55, career Wehrmacht, who'd been given camp duty because he was too principled for the Eastern Front and not brutal enough for the SS. He'd run Stalag Luft III with stern efficiency, but without cruelty, enforcing Geneva Convention protocols because he believed rules mattered even when Germany was losing. "Explain yourself, Lieutenant Thompson," Wagner said in careful English. His voice was cold as the February wind, but controlled, not angry, not yet, just confused and waiting for an explanation that would make sense of the impossible. Davey's face was grey with exhaustion. His hands trembled from cold or adrenaline, or both. The Wehrmacht coat hung on him wrong, too big in the shoulders, too short in the arms, smelling of pine trees and gunpowder and something else. Death, maybe. "I can explain," Davey said, his Yorkshire accent thick with something between defiance and desperation. "But first, I need your help. There's a German soldier dying in the forest, 2 miles north. He needs surgery I can't perform in the woods. He needs a hospital, and he needs it now." Silence. The guards looked at each other, at Wagner, at this British prisoner who'd vanished for 8 hours and returned dressed as the enemy, claiming he needed help saving a German life. "You expect me to believe," Wagner said slowly, "that you escaped, found a wounded German soldier, and returned to ask for medical assistance?" "I didn't escape," Davey said. "I heard gunfire in the forest. During exercise period, heard someone screaming. I went to investigate. Prisoners do not leave the compound without authorization." "I know." "Leaving the compound is escape. Escape carries death penalty." "I know that too," Davey said, meeting Wagner's eyes without flinching. "But there was a man dying. I'm a doctor. I took an oath before I took a commission. The oath doesn't care about fences." Wagner studied him for a long moment, then made a decision that would end his career or vindicate his belief that some things transcended military necessity. "Take me to him." They went into the forest, Wagner, Davey, 4 guards, following footprints in the snow that told a story Davey's words couldn't fully explain. 2 sets of prints leaving the camp fence, drag marks returning. Blood drops that darkened the snow like punctuation marks in a sentence about violence. 2 miles through trees that creaked with ice and cold. And there, in a small clearing sheltered by pines, they found him. Unteroffizier Otto Schneider, 23 years old, Home Guard, not frontline Wehrmacht. Shot 3 times by someone who'd meant to kill him and nearly succeeded. He was barely conscious. Wrapped in blankets Davey had scavenged from somewhere. A makeshift tourniquet on his leg that had probably saved his life, but wouldn't save it much longer. "Who shot him?" Wagner asked. "I don't know," Davey said. "He was already wounded when I found him. Couldn't tell me what happened, just kept saying bitte hilf mir. Please help me, so I helped." Wagner knelt beside Otto, checked his pulse, his breathing. The wounds that were still bleeding despite Davey's first aid. "He needs surgery immediately." "That's what I've been telling you," Davey said. "Then why did you return to the camp?" Wagner asked, looking up. "Why not stay here? Keep helping him. Why risk coming back?" Davey met his eyes. "Because I needed supplies I don't have. Because he needs a surgeon, and I'm just a flight surgeon who knows enough to be dangerous. Because—" He paused. "Because 17 British prisoners in the camp have pneumonia. Without proper antibiotics, they'll die within 2 weeks. And I know Otto's unit received a medical supply shipment 3 days ago, including sulfur drugs, including penicillin, including the medicine that could save my men." Wagner stood slowly. "You came back to beg for medicine." "I came back to barter," Davey corrected. "I save Otto. You give me the medicine that saves my men. Fair trade. Both sides win." "And if I refuse?" "Then Otto dies in this forest," Davey said quietly. "And my men die in your camp, and we all go to hell knowing we chose regulations over human lives." Wagner was silent for a long time. The wind moved through the pines. Otto's breathing rattled in his chest. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and Oberst Heinrich Wagner, career Wehrmacht officer who'd spent 4 years believing that order and discipline and following proper protocol was what separated civilization from chaos, made the second career-ending decision of the night. "Get him to the infirmary, and Lieutenant Thompson, you will perform the surgery under supervision. If he survives, we will discuss your barter." They carried Otto back to camp, through the forest. Past the fence that should have been impenetrable, into the German infirmary that POWs were never allowed to enter, and Davey, still wearing the dead guard's coat, still covered in Otto's blood, scrubbed his hands with lye soap and prepared to do surgery on the enemy who'd been guarding him for 14 months. The surgery took 6 hours. Davey worked with German medical staff who'd been trained in universities that taught the same anatomy, the same procedures, the same Hippocratic oath that transcended nationality. They removed bullets, repaired torn arteries, stopped the bleeding that had been trying to kill Otto since whoever had shot him had pulled the trigger. And at 0800 hours on February the 15th, when the sun came up over a camp that had spent the night in lockdown wondering what was happening in the forbidden German infirmary, Otto Schneider was alive, weak, damaged, but breathing on his own and expected to survive. Wagner found Davey in the infirmary washroom, scrubbing blood from his hands that had been stained red so long the water ran pink. "He will live," Wagner said. "Yes," Davey confirmed. "Thanks to you." "Thanks to everyone," Davey corrected. "Your medical staff, your supplies, your decision to let an enemy prisoner operate on a German soldier instead of letting him die." Wagner nodded slowly. "About your barter proposal." Davey turned, hands still dripping, waiting. "The medicine you requested. Sulfur drugs, penicillin. I cannot simply give you Wehrmacht medical supplies. There are regulations, inventory controls, questions I would have to answer." "Then my men die," Davey said flatly. "I didn't say I wouldn't do it," Wagner interrupted. "I said I cannot simply give it to you. But what I can do is file a report claiming that medical supplies were contaminated, that they must be disposed of properly. And if those supplies happen to be disposed of in the British camp infirmary instead of the incinerator, well, paperwork mistakes happen during wartime." Davey stared at him. "You'd lie on an official report." "I prefer to think of it as creative interpretation of disposal protocols," Wagner said. "But yes, I would lie, because you saved Otto, and because 17 British prisoners dying from preventable illness in a camp under my command would make me complicit in murder, regardless of what regulations say is proper procedure." "Thank you," Davey said, his voice breaking. "Don't thank me," Wagner said. "This doesn't change anything. You're still a prisoner. I'm still your captor. The war still decides who wins. But within the small space we control, within this camp, we can choose to be men instead of uniforms. You proved that tonight. The least I can do is remember the lesson." The medicine was disposed of that afternoon. 17 British prisoners with pneumonia received sulfur drugs and penicillin that saved their lives. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly, steadily, the fevers broke, the coughs subsided, the colour returned to faces that had been grey with approaching death. And the camp, British and German both, understood something had shifted. That a British flight surgeon had violated every regulation to save a German guard. That a German commandant had violated every protocol to reward that choice. That the war hadn't destroyed everything human, even in a prison camp where men were divided by fences and flags. But the cost was coming. The Gestapo had been investigating Davey's escape. Had questions about the 8-hour absence, about the missing guard whose coat Davey had been wearing, about what really happened in that forest and whether a British prisoner could be trusted around German personnel. 3 days after the surgery, 2 Gestapo officers arrived at Stalag Luft III demanding answers. Wagner met them in his office. Calm, prepared, with documents that told a version of the story that was technically true, but strategically incomplete. Lieutenant Thompson left the compound without authorization, Wagner confirmed. During exercise period, he heard gunfire and went to investigate. He found Unteroffizier Schneider wounded and provided first aid that saved the soldier's life. He then returned voluntarily to request additional medical assistance. "And the guard's coat he was wearing?" the senior Gestapo officer asked. "Where did that come from?" "From another guard who'd been killed in the same incident that wounded Schneider," Wagner said. "Thompson used it for warmth while treating the wounded. Standard medical practice in winter conditions." "And who shot Schneider and killed this other guard?" "Unknown," Wagner said. "Possibly partisans, possibly deserters. We are investigating." The Gestapo officer studied him. "You expect us to believe a British prisoner escaped, provided aid to German personnel, and returned voluntarily?" I expect you to investigate and reach your own conclusions, Wagner said. The facts are documented. Thompson saved a German soldier's life. Whether that makes him a hero or a security risk is above my authority to determine. The Gestapo investigation continued for 2 weeks. They interviewed Davey multiple times, harsh interrogations designed to find cracks in his story. But Davey's story never changed, because it was true. He'd heard gunfire. He'd gone to help. He'd found Otto wounded. He'd provided first aid. He'd returned for supplies. He'd performed surgery, every detail verifiable, every action explainable. And the Gestapo, despite their suspicions, couldn't prove otherwise. They interviewed Otto too, when he was strong enough to talk. And Otto, who'd been raised in a small town where honor still mattered, told them the truth. The British doctor saved my life. He didn't have to. He could have let me die. Instead, he risked execution to help me. That's not the action of an enemy. That's the action of a human being. The investigation was dropped, not because the Gestapo was satisfied, but because Germany was collapsing. The Eastern Front was crumbling. The Allies were crossing the Rhine. And the Third Reich had bigger problems than one British POW who'd saved a German guard's life. Wagner was never officially reprimanded, but he was never promoted either. His career stalled. His reputation as a commandant who was too soft on prisoners followed him. And when the war ended, when British forces liberated Stalag Luft III on April 28, 1945, Wagner was arrested as a POW camp commandant and prepared for the war crimes tribunals that would judge German officers. But something unexpected happened. Davey testified at Wagner's hearing, spoke about the commandant who'd run the camp with fairness, who'd enforced Geneva Convention protocols, who'd allowed a British prisoner to save a German guard's life, who'd risked his career to provide medicine that saved 17 British POWs. Oberst Wagner is not a war criminal, Davey told the tribunal. He's a man who remembered that prisoners were human beings, that the rules were meant to protect people, not punish them, that honor survived even inside barbed wire. Wagner was released. No charges filed, no punishment beyond the months of waiting in uncertainty. And on the day of his release, Davey was there, waiting outside the detention center. They shook hands. 2 men who'd been enemies, who'd been captor and captive, who'd learned that those categories were less important than the choices they made. "Thank you," Wagner said, "for speaking on my behalf." "Thank you," Davey replied, "for remembering you were human when the war tried to make you forget." They parted ways, different countries, different futures, but connected by a February night when one man had chosen to help instead of escape, and another had chosen mercy instead of regulations. Davey returned to England, went back to medicine, became a surgeon at a hospital in London, never spoke much about the war except to explain the scars on his hands from that night in the forest. Otto survived, went home to his small town in Bavaria, became a teacher, married, had children. And every February 14th he sent Davey a letter. Just a few lines, always in careful English, always saying the same thing. "Thank you for saving my life when you could have walked past. Thank you for proving that enemies can choose compassion. Thank you for being the doctor who remembered his oath was bigger than his uniform." Wagner lived until 1983. Quiet life in Austria. Never talked about his military service except to say he'd tried to run his camp honourably. And when he died, his family found a letter he'd written but never sent, addressed to Davey. "Lieutenant Thompson, I have thought often about that February night, about your decision to help Otto instead of escaping, about my decision to support you instead of following protocol. The war taught me to follow orders. You taught me that sometimes orders are wrong and conscience is right. I spent my military career believing discipline was the highest virtue. You proved that compassion is higher. Thank you for that lesson. It was the most important thing I learned in 40 years of service. With respect and gratitude, Heinrich Wagner." Davey received the letter from Wagner's daughter in 1984. He was 70 years old by then. Retired from surgery, but still practicing medicine in a clinic for refugees who couldn't afford traditional care. He read the letter in his office, surrounded by patients who didn't speak English, who'd fled wars that had nothing to do with 1945, but everything to do with the same human cruelty that had created POW camps and barbed wire. He wept, not from sadness, but from gratitude, from the knowledge that the choice he'd made on a February night in 1945, the choice that could have gotten him executed, had mattered, had created ripples that reached across 4 decades and proved that one act of compassion could survive anything. The 17 British POWs who'd received the medicine, they survived. All 17 went home to England, to families, to lives that wouldn't have existed if Davey hadn't risked everything to save them. Some became doctors themselves, some became teachers, some just became fathers and husbands and ordinary men who lived ordinary lives made possible by extraordinary choices. And every year, on February 14th, they gathered, not all of them. Distance and age made that impossible, but as many as could, and they toasted David Thompson, the flight surgeon who'd become a prisoner, the prisoner who'd become a hero, the hero who'd simply called himself a doctor doing what doctors do. One of them, Flight Sergeant Robert Mitchell, kept a journal. In it, he wrote about that February night from his perspective as a sick man watching from the barracks while Davey disappeared and returned. We thought he'd gone mad, thought the stress of captivity had broken him. When he came back wearing a German coat covered in blood, we were certain he'd done something terrible. But he hadn't. He'd done something impossible. He'd seen a dying man and decided that man's nationality didn't matter more than his life. He'd risked execution to get medicine for us. He'd performed surgery on a guard who'd been watching us for months. And he'd taught us all that humanity survives war if we choose to let it. I owe him my life. But more than that, I owe him my understanding that enemies are just men fighting for the wrong reasons. That compassion is more powerful than hatred. That one choice to help instead of harm can change everything. Davey Thompson died in 1997 at 83 years old in his home in Yorkshire, surrounded by family who'd heard the story so many times they could recite it. His last words, spoken to his granddaughter who was studying to be a doctor, were these: "Remember your oath. It's bigger than politics, bigger than nationality, bigger than the wars that will always try to make you choose sides. You're a doctor first. Everything else is secondary. Don't let anyone tell you differently." This is the story they don't teach you, the one that doesn't fit neatly into heroes and villains, the one that reminds us that even in the worst moments of human history, people chose compassion over escape, duty over safety, humanity over the uniforms and fences that tried to divide them. And sometimes, 8 hours in a forest saving an enemy's life mattered more than any battle, any victory, any flag. If this story reminded you that history is more complex, more beautiful, and more heartbreaking than we usually admit, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Tell me if your family has stories like this. Tell me what we've forgotten that deserves to be remembered. Because at WW2 Declassified, we don't just tell war stories. We tell human stories that happen to take place during war. And those are the ones that matter most. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And I'll see you in the next story.